That night, April 3rd, 1999, my entire world collapsed in the space of a 2-hour conversation. The business partnership I'd sacrificed my own career for was built on fraud. Fraud? How could you not know? I was blind. The financial security I thought we had didn't exist. What? How is that possible? I'm so sorry. The man I trusted completely had been betraying me in every possible way for years. What did you do? I did what any woman in shock would do.
I never believed that coffee shops could be places of profound revelation until the afternoon of March 15, 2024. That was the day I met a woman who would fundamentally alter everything I thought I knew about heartbreak, betrayal, and the kind of strength it takes to rebuild your life from ashes. What she told me in those hours over coffee would shake me, inspire me, and ultimately lead me here, to you, sharing a truth so quietly powerful that most women spend their entire lives never quite believing they possess it. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what I witnessed, what I learned, and what I'm about to share with you. Because this woman was right about one thing: once you understand that your devastation can become your foundation, you carry the weight of that knowledge forever. And sometimes, the most generous thing you can do is pass that weight to someone else who's ready to bear it. This is that story. It was one of those crisp spring afternoons when the world feels full of possibility. I had been sitting in the corner of a boutique coffee shop in downtown Chicago for almost 3 hours, nursing a latte that had long gone cold, staring at my laptop screen without really seeing it. My own life felt stuck. A job I'd grown to resent, a relationship that had ended 6 months earlier, and a pervasive sense that I was supposed to be doing something more with my life but had no idea what that something was. The coffee shop was the kind of place that attracted a specific type of person: entrepreneurs with MacBooks, freelancers taking video calls in corners, women having intense business meetings over cappuccinos. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the place hummed with that particular energy of people building things, creating things, hustling toward dreams they refused to let go of. That's when she walked in. I'm not sure what drew my attention to her initially. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, with a quiet confidence that seemed almost regal. She was probably in her early 60s, impeccably dressed in tailored navy slacks and a cream silk blouse, her silver hair cut in a sleek bob that framed a face that was beautiful not despite its age but because of it. Every line seemed earned, every expression purposeful. But what truly caught my attention was what she did after ordering her coffee. Instead of finding a seat, she stood by the pickup counter and pulled out a small, worn notebook, the kind with a leather cover that's been handled so much it's molded to its owner's grip. She opened it, read something, closed her eyes for a moment as if saying a prayer or making an affirmation, then smiled to herself before taking her coffee to a table near the window. I watched, fascinated, as she repeated this ritual. Every 15 minutes or so, she'd pause whatever she was working on, open that notebook, read something, close her eyes and smile. It was like watching someone fuel themselves with something invisible but essential. I'm a journalist by training, though I'd been working in corporate communications for the past 5 years. A compromise with financial security that had slowly drained my soul. But the journalist in me never quite died, and I've always been drawn to people who seem to carry stories in their silence, who have lived through experiences that mark them in ways visible only to those who know how to look. After watching this woman's ritual for the 3rd time, my curiosity got the better of me. I closed my laptop, picked up my cold latte, and walked over to her table. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice slightly uncertain. "But I couldn't help noticing your notebook, and the way you return to it. It seems like it means something special to you." The woman looked up at me, and I was struck immediately by her eyes, deep brown, warm, but carrying something else beneath the warmth. Sadness, maybe. Or the kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving things that should have destroyed you. She smiled, and it was genuine. "It does mean something special," she said, her voice rich and measured. "Please, sit down if you'd like. I could use a break from spreadsheets anyway." I settled into the chair across from her, feeling suddenly nervous. "I'm Sarah," I offered. "I'm a journalist. Or I was. Or I want to be again. I'm not really sure anymore." The woman's smile deepened. "I know that feeling well. The uncertainty about who you are versus who you want to be versus who you used to be. It's uncomfortable, isn't it?" "Very," I admitted. "I'm Vivienne Adams," she said, extending her hand across the table. I shook it, noting the firm grip, the confident eye contact. "And this notebook, she gestured to the leather-bound book, is my reminder. A record of promises I made to myself at the worst moment of my life. Promises I check in with regularly to make sure I'm keeping them. There was something in the way she said it that made me understand this wasn't casual conversation. This was an invitation into something deeper. What kind of promises? I asked. Vivienne studied me for a long moment, as if deciding whether I was ready for whatever she was about to share. Promises about what I would do after my entire life collapsed. After the man I loved betrayed me in ways I didn't know were possible. After I lost everything I thought defined me. After I had to choose between giving up or becoming someone entirely new. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. Would you like to hear the story? The real story, not the sanitized version I give at conferences or the inspiring highlights that make it into magazine articles, but the actual, messy, devastating, triumphant truth. My heart rate quickened. This was the kind of story I dreamed of telling back when I thought I'd be an investigative journalist uncovering truths that mattered. Yes, I said. Absolutely yes. Vivienne glanced at her watch. I have about 2 hours before my next meeting. That should be just enough time. She signaled the barista for fresh coffees, and when they arrived, she settled back in her chair, opened the notebook to the first page, and began. Let me start by telling you about the woman I was before everything fell apart, Vivienne said, her voice taking on the rhythm of someone who had processed these memories enough times that they'd formed a coherent narrative. Because you can't understand the rebuilding without understanding what was destroyed. She took a slow sip of her coffee. 25 years ago, I was 37 years old, living what everyone would have called a charmed life. I was married to Marcus Adams, a man I'd met in business school at Northwestern. He was charismatic, ambitious, brilliant, or so I thought. We'd been married for 12 years, and together we'd built what looked like a perfect life. Vivienne's expression grew distant as she reached back across the decades. Marcus ran a real estate development company. I had put my own career aspirations on hold to support his business, managing operations, handling client relationships, overseeing the financial side while he focused on deals and development. We told ourselves we were partners building an empire together. Were you happy? I asked. I thought I was, Vivienne said carefully. Looking back, I realize I was performing happiness more than feeling it. But I didn't know that then. I was too busy being the perfect wife, the perfect business partner, the perfect social hostess. We had a beautiful home in Lincoln Park, a vacation property in Door County, the right friends, the right cars, the right life. She paused, her jaw tightening slightly. We didn't have children. That was my one regret, though Marcus always said we'd get around to it eventually. First we needed to establish the business, then we needed to expand, then the timing wasn't right. I was 37 and starting to panic about my biological clock, but Marcus kept reassuring me we had time. Vivienne's voice grew harder. What I didn't know, what I was completely blind to, was that Marcus had been lying to me about almost everything for at least 5 years. Maybe longer. I leaned forward, drawn into the story. What kind of lies? Every kind, Vivienne said flatly. The business wasn't nearly as successful as he claimed. He'd been hiding losses, falsifying reports, showing me doctored financial statements. The vacation property? Mortgaged to the hilt. Our home? Second mortgage I didn't know about. Our savings? Gone, funneled into covering business debts and maintaining the illusion of success. She took a slow breath. But the financial deception, devastating as it was, wasn't the worst part. The worst part was discovering that Marcus had been having an affair with one of our clients, a woman named Jennifer who was 15 years younger than me. And it wasn't a brief indiscretion. They'd been together for 3 years. 3 years of him lying to me every single day. I felt my chest tighten with vicarious pain. How did you find out? The way these things usually come to light, Vivienne said. Jennifer got pregnant. And she wanted Marcus to leave me, to make their relationship public, to start a family with her. So she gave him an ultimatum. And Marcus, weak, selfish Marcus, came home one evening and told me everything. Vivienne's voice remained steady, but I could see her hands gripping her coffee cup a little tighter. He didn't confess out of guilt or desire to make things right. He confessed because Jennifer was threatening to expose him to all our clients and destroy his reputation if he didn't leave me. So he was leaving me, but he wanted to frame it as this noble truth-telling rather than what it actually was, abandonment. That night, April 3rd, 1999, my entire world collapsed in the space of a 2-hour conversation. The marriage I'd invested 12 years in was a lie. The business partnership I'd sacrificed my own career for was built on fraud. The financial security I thought we had didn't exist. And the man I trusted completely had been betraying me in every possible way for years. I felt tears pricking my eyes, and this wasn't even my story. What did you do? I did what any woman in shock would do, Vivienne said. I sat there trying to process information that didn't make sense. I asked questions he barely answered. I cried, which seemed to make him uncomfortable. And then I asked him to leave, to go stay somewhere else while I figured out what to do next. Vivienne's expression darkened. Marcus actually had the audacity to look relieved. He'd already packed a bag. He'd already arranged to move in with Jennifer. He left that night, and I sat alone in our home, which I would soon discover wasn't really our home anymore, trying to understand how my entire life had been built on foundations that never existed. She was quiet for a long moment, and I waited, sensing we were approaching something crucial. The next morning, I did what I thought was the responsible thing. I called our lawyer, someone I thought was our shared lawyer but who it turned out primarily worked for Marcus. I called our accountant. I started trying to understand the full scope of the disaster. Vivienne's voice grew heavy. The reality was worse than Marcus had admitted. The business was essentially insolvent, held together with debt and deception. We owed over $800,000 to various creditors. The properties were all underwater. And because I'd been a signatory on many of the business documents, trusting Marcus completely, I was legally liable for much of the debt. Could you declare bankruptcy? I asked. I could have, Vivienne said. And my lawyer initially advised it. But Marcus fought it because bankruptcy would destroy his ability to continue doing business. He wanted us to sell everything, pay off as much as possible, and walk away with our reputations intact. He promised that if I cooperated with his plan, he'd help me financially after the dust settled. Vivienne's laugh was bitter. I was naive enough to believe him. So over the next 6 months, I cooperated with the dismantling of the life we'd built. We sold the properties at a loss. We liquidated the business. We paid off creditors. And when it was all done, I walked away with $18,000 and no marketable job experience that wasn't tied to Marcus's company. What about the divorce settlement? Marcus's lawyer was much better than mine, Vivienne said flatly. Because I'd been working for the company rather than drawing a separate salary, I had no independent income to point to. Because we'd been liquidating assets to pay business debts, there wasn't much left to divide. And because Marcus was now expecting a child with Jennifer, he successfully argued that his financial obligations to his new family should take priority. Vivienne's voice grew sharp. I got exactly $50,000 in the settlement. $50,000 for 12 years of marriage, for sacrificing my career, for managing his business, for the partnership I thought we were building. He got to walk away and start fresh with Jennifer and their baby, while I got barely enough money to survive for a year if I was very careful. That's outrageous, I said, anger flaring on behalf of this woman I'd just met. It's what happens when you trust completely and protect yourself not at all, Vivienne said. It's what happens when you build your entire identity around being someone's partner rather than maintaining your own separate identity. It's what happens in a system that still doesn't protect women who sacrifice careers for marriages and then get discarded. She took another sip of coffee. But here's what I didn't know then, what I wouldn't understand for several more years. That betrayal, that devastation, that complete destruction of everything I thought defined me, it was actually a gift. A terrible, painful gift that would force me to become someone I never would have become otherwise. I felt something shifting in the energy between us. We were approaching the turn in Vivienne's story, the moment where devastation would begin its slow transformation into triumph. What happened next? I asked quietly. Vivienne opened her notebook, showing me the first page. In elegant handwriting, dated April 15th, 2000, it read, "Today I am nothing. Tomorrow I will become everything I was meant to be." "That's the first promise I made to myself," she said softly. 1 year after Marcus left, on my 38th birthday, sitting alone in a studio apartment that cost $800 a month, working a reception job that paid $12 an hour, I wrote that line. And then I started planning who I was going to become. Vivienne's story was unfolding in a way that made my own problems seem trivial, yet somehow her pain was unlocking something in me, a recognition that devastation isn't the end of the story, it's often just the beginning. "The first year after Marcus left was survival mode," Vivienne continued, her fingers tracing the words in her notebook. "I moved from our Lincoln Park home to a studio apartment in a neighborhood that made me nervous to walk to my car at night. I took the first job I could get, receptionist at a law firm, because I needed income immediately and had no recent resume to offer potential employers." She looked up from the notebook. "Do you know what's humbling about being 38 years old and working as a receptionist? Everything. My co-workers were mostly in their early 20s, just starting out. They were kind but clearly confused about why someone my age was doing entry-level work. And the lawyers I worked for, many of them were younger than me, treating me with the polite condescension people reserve for service workers they don't see as fully human." "That must have been devastating," I said. "It was," Vivienne agreed. "But it was also clarifying. Because sitting at that reception desk, answering phones and scheduling appointments and being essentially invisible, I had a lot of time to think. Time to examine how I'd ended up there. Time to take responsibility for the choices I'd made, even while acknowledging that Marcus's betrayal wasn't my fault." She closed the notebook. I realized I'd made a fundamental error. I'd built my entire identity around being Marcus's wife, Marcus's business partner, Marcus's support system. I'd erased myself to make room for us. And when he left, there was no me left standing. Just this shell of a person who didn't know who she was without him. Vivienne's expression grew more intense. That first year, I was angry. Furiously, consumingly angry. At Marcus for his betrayal. At myself for my naivety. At the system that allowed men to destroy women financially and legally and walk away unscathed. At every friend who'd disappeared when I was no longer part of a successful couple. At the universe for allowing such injustice. "Anger seems like a reasonable response," I observed. "It was reasonable," Vivienne said. "But it was also destructive. Because as long as I was focused on what had been done to me, I was still trapped in victim mode. Still giving Marcus power over my emotional state. Still waiting for justice or revenge or some external validation that I'd been wronged." She leaned forward. About 9 months into that first year, I had a conversation that changed everything. One of the lawyers at the firm, a woman named Rachel Liu who was maybe 5 years older than me, she noticed me crying in the bathroom one day. Instead of politely ignoring it like most people would, she asked if I wanted to get coffee after work. Vivienne's expression softened at the memory. Over coffee, I told Rachel everything. The whole humiliating story. And I expected sympathy, maybe some outrage on my behalf. But Rachel surprised me. She said, "Vivienne, I'm going to tell you something that might sound harsh, but I think you need to hear it. Your story isn't special. Every woman in this city knows a version of your story. Maybe it happened to them, maybe to their mother or sister or best friend. Betrayal, financial devastation, having to start over, it's common. What's uncommon is what women do with that experience." "What did she mean?" I asked. "Rachel said that I had 2 choices," Vivienne explained. "I could spend the rest of my life being the woman Marcus destroyed, telling the story of my betrayal and expecting people to feel sorry for me. Or I could become the woman who survived Marcus, who used that experience as fuel to build something he could never touch." She said both paths were valid, but only one would actually give me my life back. Vivienne paused, letting that sink in. That conversation happened on a Thursday evening in February. By that weekend, I'd made my decision. I was going to become the second woman, the one who survived and thrived. But I had no idea how to actually do that. What was your first step? Education, Vivienne said firmly. I realized that my biggest vulnerability had been financial ignorance. I'd let Marcus handle everything money-related, which meant I'd been complicit in my own financial ruin through neglect if not through intent. So I decided to learn everything I could about money, business, investing, wealth building, all the things I should have known all along. She smiled slightly. I started with the library. Read every book about personal finance, business management, entrepreneurship I could find. Then I took online courses. This was early 2000s, so the internet was just starting to have good educational content. I taught myself basic accounting, financial analysis, business strategy. I studied women who'd built businesses from nothing. I absorbed everything. While working full-time as a receptionist? While working full-time, yes, Vivienne confirmed. I'd work 8 to 5 at the law firm, then go home and study until midnight. Weekends were completely dedicated to education. I had no social life, no dating, no entertainment budget. Everything was focused on building knowledge. She looked directly at me. Here's what most people don't understand about transforming your life. It requires a period of obsessive, almost monastic focus. You can't rebuild yourself while maintaining your social life and comfort level and entertainment habits. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable, lonely, and slightly obsessed for a sustained period. I felt that truth landing hard. How much of my own stuckness was because I was unwilling to be uncomfortable? About 6 months into my self-education, I started noticing patterns in the law firm where I worked, Vivienne continued. Rachel Liu, the lawyer who'd had that honest conversation with me, she specialized in family law. Divorce cases, specifically. And I saw the same story play out over and over, women coming out of marriages financially devastated, legally outmaneuvered, emotionally destroyed. Vivienne's voice grew more animated. These women would come in for consultations, and I'd watch them. I saw myself in their confused, scared faces. I heard my own story in their tales of financial betrayal and marital dissolution. And I started thinking, there has to be a better way. There has to be a way to help women protect themselves before they end up sitting in a divorce lawyer's office with nothing. Is that when you got the idea for your business? I asked. Not immediately, Vivienne said. First, I had to understand what the actual need was. So I started having conversations. I'd take Rachel's clients to coffee after their consultations, off the clock, just as one woman to another. I'd ask them about their financial knowledge, their understanding of marital assets, their awareness of their rights. And almost universally, I found the same thing. These were smart, capable women who knew nothing about their own financial lives. She leaned back in her chair. They didn't know what accounts their husbands had. They didn't know about retirement savings or investment portfolios. They couldn't read a tax return. They'd never looked at a mortgage statement. They'd trusted their husbands to handle everything, and that trust had made them vulnerable when the marriages ended. So you saw a market need, I observed. I saw a crisis, Vivienne corrected. A systemic crisis where women were being set up for financial devastation by a culture that told them they didn't need to understand money as long as they had husbands to handle it for them. And I realized that if I could create something to address this crisis, I could prevent other women from ending up where I'd ended up. Vivienne opened her notebook again, flipping to a page filled with notes and diagrams. In April 2001, 2 years after Marcus left, I wrote down my business concept. I called it the Foundation Project. The idea was to create a financial education and planning service specifically for married women. Not couples counseling, not general financial advice, but something laser-focused on ensuring women understood and protected their own financial interests within marriage. What did that look like practically? I asked. Initially, it was just me offering workshops on Saturdays at community centers and libraries, Vivienne explained. Basic financial literacy for married women, how to read tax returns, how to track marital assets, how to establish credit in your own name, how to protect yourself legally and financially while still maintaining a healthy marriage. I charged $25 per workshop to cover the cost of materials and room rental. She smiled at the memory. My first workshop had 4 attendees. 4 women in a library basement on a Saturday morning, learning about bank statements and credit scores. But those 4 women told their friends, and the next month I had 11. Then 23. Then I had to start doing 2 workshops a month because demand was outstrowing capacity. When did it become a real business? About a year in, Vivienne said. By then I was doing 4 workshops a month and had a waiting list. Women started asking if I offered one-on-one consulting to help them assess their specific situations. So I started doing that too, meeting with women individually, reviewing their financial documents, helping them understand their true financial picture. Vivienne's expression grew more serious. And what I discovered in those one-on-one sessions was disturbing. I found hidden debts, secret accounts, forged signatures, financial abuse disguised as financial management. I found women whose husbands had taken out credit cards in their names without their knowledge. Women whose retirement savings had been emptied. Women who owned nothing despite decades of marriage. That must have been triggering, given your own experience, I said. It was, Vivienne admitted. Many nights I'd go home after these consultations and cry, angry all over again about what had happened to me and what was happening to these women. But I also felt purposeful for the first time since Marcus left. I was doing something that mattered. I was helping women protect themselves in ways I hadn't protected myself. She closed her notebook. By 2003, the foundation project had outgrown the workshop model. I was getting so much demand for one-on-one consulting that I couldn't keep up while still working at the law firm. So I made a terrifying decision. I quit my receptionist job and went full-time with my business. Did you have enough saved to take that risk? Barely, Vivienne said with a laugh. I had about 6 months of living expenses saved, which felt like a tiny cushion for such a big leap. But I'd learned something important from all those financial education books I'd read. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk. Playing it safe, staying at the law firm, that was a path to nowhere. The business was a path to somewhere, even if I didn't know exactly where yet. Vivienne gestured to the barista for more coffee. Going full-time allowed me to expand the business model. I started offering different tiers of service. The basic workshop for $50, a half-day intensive for $250, and comprehensive financial planning for $1,500. I hired my first employee, a young woman named Keisha who was brilliant with spreadsheets and client management. Were you making good money at this point? I asked. I was making okay money, Vivienne clarified. Not wealthy by any means, but comfortable. I'd moved to a better apartment, could afford to eat in restaurants occasionally, wasn't constantly worried about making rent. But I was still just barely in the black each month, and I knew I needed to scale if the business was going to be truly sustainable. She took a sip of her new coffee. That's when I met Diana Volkov. This was late 2004, about 5.5 years after Marcus left. Diana was a venture capitalist who'd been referred to me by one of my clients. She wanted the comprehensive financial planning service, so we met for our initial consultation. Vivienne's expression grew animated. Within 10 minutes of reviewing Diana's portfolio, I realized she didn't need my services at all. She was incredibly sophisticated financially, understood her assets completely, had protection mechanisms in place I'd never even heard of. So I told her this, said I didn't think she needed what I was offering and I didn't want to take her money unnecessarily. How did she respond? She laughed and said she'd been testing me, Vivienne said. She wanted to see if I'd try to sell her services she didn't need, or if I'd be honest even if it cost me money. And when I'd been honest, she said, "Good. Now let's have a real conversation. I don't need your services, but I think a lot of women do. Have you ever considered scaling this beyond one-on-one consulting?" Vivienne's voice grew more intense. Diana spent the next 2 hours completely taking apart my business model, not in a mean way, but in a strategic way. She showed me how I was thinking too small, how the workshop plus consulting model would never scale beyond a certain point, how I was trading time for money in a way that capped my potential growth. What did she suggest instead? She suggested I build a systematized program, Vivienne explained. Instead of custom consulting for each client, create a structured curriculum that could be delivered consistently at scale. Instead of me being the only person who could deliver the service, develop a training program so I could hire and certify others to deliver it. Instead of marketing locally in Chicago, build a franchise-style model that could expand nationally. Vivienne paused. And then Diana said something that changed everything. She said, "Vivienne, you're not in the consulting business. You're in the empowerment business. You're teaching women to never be as vulnerable as you were. That mission can scale to millions of women if you're willing to think bigger." I leaned forward, completely absorbed. Did she invest? Not immediately, Vivienne said. First, she wanted me to prove I could systematize the model. She challenged me to take everything I knew and turn it into a structured program that someone else could deliver just as effectively as I could. She gave me 6 months to develop it, and said if I succeeded, she'd consider investing. Vivienne's expression showed both pride and remembered exhaustion. Those 6 months were the hardest work I'd ever done. I was still running the existing business to pay my bills, but every spare moment went into developing the curriculum. I created workbooks, presentations, assessment tools, certification standards. I called it the Foundation Certification Program, a 12-week training that would certify women to deliver my financial education model in their own communities. Did you meet Diana's deadline? I did, Vivienne said. Barely. I delivered the complete curriculum on the last day of the 6-month window. And Diana reviewed every page, challenged every assumption, pushed me to refine and improve. Then she said yes. She'd invest $500,000 in exchange for a 30% equity stake. I felt my eyes widen. That's a significant investment. It was, Vivienne agreed. Especially in 2005, for a business focused on women's financial education. Diana was taking a risk on me, and we both knew it. But she believed in the mission and in my ability to execute. And that investment changed everything. Vivienne looked at me intently. Here's what that money allowed me to do: hire a real team instead of just one employee. Develop proper marketing materials. Build a website that could handle online registration and payment. Create a physical training center where I could run the certification program. Most importantly, it allowed me to stop scraping by and start building something that could last. What happened next? The first foundation certification program launched in January 2006, Vivienne said. I had 23 women in that initial cohort: teachers, social workers, financial advisors, therapists, even a few lawyers. Women who saw the same need I'd seen and wanted to be part of the solution. We spent 12 weeks together, and I taught them everything I'd learned about financial education, client management, and empowering women to protect themselves. Her voice grew warmer. When those 23 certified educators went back to their communities and started offering foundation workshops, something remarkable happened. The model worked. Women attended their workshops, hired them for consulting, told their friends. Within 6 months, those initial 23 educators had served over 1,000 women collectively. And they were all asking when the next certification program would run. So you ran another one? Many more, Vivienne confirmed. By the end of 2006, I'd run 4 certification programs and had 97 certified educators across 15 states. By 2007, we had over 200. By 2008, we'd expanded into Canada and were developing materials in Spanish to serve Latina communities. The business was growing faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Vivienne pulled out her phone and showed me a spreadsheet. By 2010, 11 years after Marcus left, the foundation project was generating $8.3 million in annual revenue. We'd served over 100,000 women through workshops and consulting. We had 450 certified educators worldwide. And I personally owned 70% of a business valued at approximately $15 million. I felt stunned by the scale of what she'd built. That's extraordinary. It was beyond anything I'd imagined that first year sitting at the reception desk, Vivienne said. But here's what most people don't understand when they hear that kind of success story: every dollar represented a woman protected. Every new educator represented communities where women would be less vulnerable. Every workshop prevented someone from ending up where I'd ended up. She looked down at her hands. The business wasn't about making money, though the money was necessary and important. The business was about transforming the fundamental power dynamic in marriages, about ensuring women had knowledge and agency and protection. The financial success was a byproduct of the mission, not the mission itself. Did you ever hear from Marcus during all this? I asked. Vivienne's expression hardened. Twice. First in 2007, when the foundation project started getting media attention. He sent an email congratulating me on my success and suggesting we should reconnect since we'd always worked so well together. He actually said that, as if we'd parted as friendly business partners rather than him abandoning me after years of betrayal. What did you do? I didn't respond, Vivienne said flatly. Rachel Liu, who'd become one of my closest friends and advisors. She reviewed the email and said it reeked of someone who'd heard I was successful and wanted back in. She advised me to document it but not engage. So I saved the email, blocked his address, and moved on. You said he contacted you twice? Vivienne's jaw tightened. The second time was in 2011. By then, the foundation project had been featured in multiple national publications. I'd done a TED Talk that went viral, and I was being recognized as a leader in women's financial empowerment. Marcus showed up at one of our public events in Chicago, just walked in like he had every right to be there. Her voice grew sharp. He approached me after my presentation, in front of dozens of people, and tried to hug me. Said he was so proud of what I'd accomplished, that he'd always known I had it in me. And then, and this is what showed me he'd learned nothing, he asked if the foundation project needed any business development consulting because he'd love to help me grow the company. That's breathtaking in its audacity, I said. It was, Vivienne agreed. But here's what was different between that moment and when he'd left 12 years earlier. I wasn't the same woman. I wasn't vulnerable or confused or looking for his approval. I looked him directly in the eye and said, very calmly but very clearly, Marcus, you are not welcome at our events, you are not welcome in my business, and you are not welcome in my life. Please leave immediately or I will have security remove you. Vivienne's expression showed grim satisfaction. He tried to laugh it off, said I was being overdramatic, that he was just trying to be supportive. But I didn't budge. I signaled security, and they escorted him out. And I never heard from him again. That must have felt vindicating, I observed. It felt necessary, Vivienne said. Not vindication exactly, but more like completion. Proof that I'd become someone who couldn't be manipulated or dismissed or made to doubt herself. Marcus had destroyed the woman I was in 1999. The woman I'd become in 2011 was completely beyond his ability to touch. She paused, and I could see something shifting in her expression, from triumph to something more complex. But there's more to the story. Because success, even extraordinary success, doesn't mean everything is perfect. Doesn't mean you're healed. Doesn't mean the betrayal stops affecting you. I waited, sensing we were approaching something important. In 2012, I met someone, Vivienne said quietly. A man named David Park. He was a professor at Northwestern, business ethics, of all things. We met at a conference where we were both speaking, and we clicked immediately. Intellectually, emotionally, every way two people can connect. Vivienne's voice grew softer. David was everything Marcus wasn't. Honest, transparent, genuinely kind. He pursued me slowly, respectfully, never pushing. And after several months of dating, I found myself falling in love for the first time since the divorce. It was terrifying and wonderful and felt like maybe I could have both, the business success and a healthy relationship. What happened? We dated for 2 years, Vivienne said. And David proposed. Beautiful proposal, ring I would have chosen myself, speech about how he wanted to spend the rest of his life supporting my mission and being my partner. Everything I thought I wanted. She looked down at her hands, where no ring sat. And I said no. I felt my breath catch. Why? Vivienne's eyes met mine. Because I realized something that took me those 2 years to understand. I didn't want to be someone's wife again. Not David's, not anyone's. Not because David wasn't wonderful. He was. Not because I didn't love him. I did. But because I'd spent 13 years being Marcus's wife, and then 13 years building a business and identity that was entirely mine. And the thought of merging my life with someone else's again, even someone as good as David, felt like giving up something essential about who I'd become. She paused, gathering her thoughts. David wanted what most people want from marriage: partnership, shared decision-making, building a life together, eventually moving in together and intertwining our lives completely. And I realized I didn't want that. I wanted my own apartment, my own space, my own complete autonomy. I wanted to be able to make every decision about my business without consulting anyone. I wanted to answer to no one. Did David understand? He tried to, Vivienne said. But ultimately, no. He couldn't understand why someone who claimed to love him wouldn't want to build a life together. He thought I was afraid, that I was letting Marcus's betrayal control my choices. And maybe there was truth in that. But mostly, I just discovered something about myself. I loved my independence more than I loved the idea of partnership. Vivienne's voice grew more intense. Breaking up with David was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Because he was perfect for me in every way except one. He wanted marriage, and I didn't. And I had to be honest about that, even though it meant losing something beautiful. Do you regret it? I asked. Sometimes, Vivienne admitted. Late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd said yes. If I'd been willing to risk vulnerability again. But then I think about what I would have had to give up: the complete freedom to run my business my way, to make decisions instantly without consultation, to travel when I want, to work 16-hour days when I'm inspired, to have my space be entirely mine. And I know I made the right choice for me. She looked directly at me. That's the thing no one tells you about rebuilding after devastation. You don't necessarily rebuild the same structure. You might build something entirely different, something that serves you better even if it doesn't look like what everyone else has. I felt tears pricking my eyes, moved by Vivienne's radical honesty about choosing herself over social expectations. After David, I stopped dating entirely, Vivienne continued. Not because I was bitter or damaged, but because I'd learned something crucial: I'm genuinely happier alone than I ever was partnered. I like my own company. I like having complete control over my space and time and decisions. I like not having to consider anyone else's needs or preferences when making choices about my life. She gestured around us. People see that as sad or evidence that I'm not healed from Marcus's betrayal. But it's not. It's me being honest about what I actually want versus what society says I should want. I built a business worth millions. I own my apartment outright. I have work that fulfills me completely. I have friendships that sustain me. What exactly am I missing that marriage would provide? That's a powerful question, I said. It is, Vivienne agreed. And it's a question more women should ask themselves. We're so conditioned to believe that partnership is necessary for completeness that we never interrogate whether we actually want it, or if we just think we should want it. She took a sip of her coffee, which had gone cold again. By 2015, the foundation project had grown to the point where I needed to make strategic decisions about its future. We were generating about $18 million annually, had over 800 certified educators worldwide, and had served more than 500,000 women. Diana Volkov, who was still my primary investor and advisor, suggested I consider selling the company. Why would you sell something so successful? I asked. Because Diana saw what I was struggling to see, Vivienne explained. She saw that I'd achieved the mission I'd set out to achieve. The foundation project was established, sustainable, making a real impact. But I was also exhausted. I'd been running the company for 14 years, and the daily operations had become more about management than about the mission that had driven me to start it. Vivienne's expression grew thoughtful. Diana said something I'll never forget. She said, "Vivienne, you built this because you needed to prove you could survive what Marcus did to you. But you've proven that. You've more than proven it. So now the question is, what do you actually want to do with the rest of your life? Keep running a business that's become routine, or do something new?" What did you decide? I spent 6 months thinking about it, Vivienne said. really interrogating what I wanted versus what I thought I should want. And I realized Diana was right. Running the foundation project had become a job, a responsibility, more than a passion. The mission still mattered to me, but the day-to-day work didn't energize me anymore. She leaned forward. So in 2016, I sold the foundation project to an education company that specialized in women's empowerment programs. They committed to maintaining all existing programs, keeping all certified educators, and expanding the mission internationally. I negotiated hard to ensure the integrity of what we'd built would be preserved. How much did you sell it for? $37 million, Vivienne said quietly. After taxes and Diana's share as an investor, I walked away with about $21 million. Plus I'd been paying myself a good salary for years and had saved well, so my total net worth after the sale was approximately $24 million. I felt stunned. You went from $18,000 and a receptionist job to $24 million in 17 years. I did, Vivienne confirmed. But here's what's important to understand: the money isn't the point. The money is just a measurement of value created. What actually matters is that I went from being a woman Marcus destroyed to being a woman who built something that survived me. The foundation project is still operating, still serving women, still fulfilling the mission. That's the real victory. She paused, then opened her notebook again. After I sold the company, I had to figure out who I was when I wasn't the founder of the foundation project. I was 54 years old, financially secure beyond my wildest dreams, and completely uncertain about what came next. What did come next? I spent a year doing nothing, Vivienne said. Traveled, read, thought, tried to understand what I wanted from the rest of my life. And gradually I realized something. I didn't want to start another business. I didn't want to build another empire. What I wanted was to help other women do what I'd done. Vivienne's expression brightened. So in 2018, I started a new venture. Not a company exactly, but more of a mentorship program. I work with women who've experienced major life disruptions: divorce, widowhood, job loss, health crises, and I help them figure out how to transform that disruption into opportunity. I don't charge for this. It's what I do because it matters to me. How many women have you worked with? About 40 so far, Vivienne said. One-on-one intensive mentorship over 6 months to a year. I help them identify their skills and passions, develop business concepts, make strategic plans, connect them with resources and networks. Some have started businesses. Some have rebuilt careers. Some have just found clarity about what they want. She smiled. And that's what I was working on when you approached me today. The spreadsheet you interrupted was a business plan for a woman named Jasmine who's starting a non-profit focused on housing for domestic violence survivors. I'm helping her think through the financial model. I felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Vivienne had shared, and by the generosity of how she was choosing to use her success. Vivienne, I said carefully, why did you tell me all this? Your whole story, everything you've been through? Why share all of this with a stranger in a coffee shop? Vivienne looked at me intently. Because when you came over here, I recognized something in your expression. The same thing I saw in my own mirror for years. A woman who's stuck between who she was and who she might become, afraid to make the leap because she doesn't know if she'll survive it. Am I right? I felt tears spilling down my cheeks. She'd seen straight through me. Yes, I whispered. I thought so, Vivienne said gently. So I'm going to tell you what I wish someone had told me during that first terrible year after Marcus left. You are going to survive this. Whatever you're going through, whatever transition or loss or uncertainty has you stuck, you're going to survive it. But more than that, you have the opportunity to use this disruption to become someone you never would have become if everything had stayed comfortable. She reached across the table and took my hand. The woman you were before, she's gone. And that's okay. That's not a tragedy. That's an opportunity. You get to decide who you become next. Not who you think you should become, not who would make other people comfortable, but who you actually want to be. Vivienne's grip tightened. Here's what I learned from turning my worst heartbreak into my greatest triumph. Devastation clears the ground. It destroys everything you thought defined you, Everything you were clinging to that maybe wasn't serving you anyway. And then you have this blank space where you can build anything. Anything at all. Most people are so terrified of that blank space that they rush to fill it with whatever's familiar. But if you can sit with the discomfort, if you can resist the urge to immediately replace what was lost, you might discover you can build something better than you ever imagined. I was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. I don't know what I want to build. You don't have to know yet, Vivienne said. That's okay. The first step isn't knowing what you want to build. The first step is being willing to sit in the blank space and ask yourself honest questions. What did you love about the woman you were before? What do you want to keep? What are you ready to release? What have you always wanted to try but never allowed yourself to try? She released my hand and pulled her notebook across the table. This is what this notebook is, a record of those questions and my answers to them over 25 years. The first promise I made to myself. The business concept that became the foundation project. The decision not to marry David. The choice to sell the company. Every major decision documented and examined. Vivienne opened to a blank page near the back and pushed the notebook toward me along with her pen. Write down one promise to yourself. Just one. Something you commit to doing or being or exploring as you figure out who you're becoming. It doesn't have to be big or ambitious. It just has to be true. I stared at the blank page, my hand trembling. What did I promise myself? What did I actually want? And then, as if the words were writing themselves, I wrote, I will stop living the life I think I should want and start building the life I actually want. When I looked up, Vivienne was smiling. That's perfect, she said. That's exactly where it starts. She glanced at her watch. I do actually have a meeting I need to get to. But before I go, I want to give you something. Vivienne pulled out a business card and wrote her email address on the back. This is my personal email. If you ever want to talk more, if you need advice or perspective or just someone who understands what it's like to rebuild from ashes, reach out. I mean that. I don't give this to many people, but I think you're someone who's actually ready to do the work. I took the card with shaking hands. Thank you. For everything. For your honesty, for your time, for recognizing you in a coffee shop and being willing to share my story. Vivienne finished with a smile. That's what women do for each other when we're being our best selves. We tell the truth. We share the real stories, not the sanitized ones. We help each other survive and thrive. She stood, gathering her things. One more thing. That notebook I showed you? I started it when I had nothing. When I was at my absolute lowest point. And I've kept it going through every victory and defeat since then. My advice? Start your own notebook. Not a journal exactly, a record of promises to yourself and decisions made and lessons learned. It becomes a map of who you're becoming. Vivienne slung her bag over her shoulder. The woman you're becoming. She's going to be remarkable. I can tell. Not because you're special or chosen, but because you're willing to sit in a coffee shop and cry while a stranger tells you uncomfortable truths about transformation. That willingness to be uncomfortable is where everything starts. With that, she walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting there with my cold latte, my tear-stained face, and a blank page in her notebook with my first promise to myself. I sat in that coffee shop for another 2 hours, staring at the words I'd written, thinking about everything Vivienne had shared. About Marcus's betrayal and her rebuilding. About the business she'd created from pain. About her choice to stay single and free. About the radical honesty required to live a life that's actually yours rather than the life everyone expects you to live. And I made a decision. A decision that would change everything, though I didn't fully understand that yet. I pulled out my laptop, opened a new document, and began writing. Not the corporate communications copy I'd been producing for years, but the truth. The story of my own stuckness, my own uncertainty, my own fear of becoming someone new. I wrote for 3 hours straight, hardly stopping, words pouring out like they'd been dammed up for years. When I finally stopped, I had the beginning of an essay. Raw, honest, vulnerable. Nothing like anything I'd written in years. And looking at it, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my divorce. Excitement. Not about what it was yet, but about what it might become. That evening, I went home to my apartment and I started a notebook. On the first page, I wrote the promise I'd made in Vivienne's notebook: I will stop living the life I think I should want and start building the life I actually want. And then I wrote a second promise: I will tell true stories that matter, even if they scare me. Over the next 6 months, I made changes. Not dramatic, blow-up-your-life changes, but strategic ones. I shifted my role at work to do more writing and less corporate communications. I started pitching essays to publications about women's experiences of transition and transformation. I reached out to Vivienne twice via email, asking for advice, and both times she responded with thoughtful, honest guidance. And I started interviewing women. Women like Vivienne who had experienced major life disruptions and had transformed them into something meaningful. Divorce, widowhood, job loss, health crises. I collected stories of women who had survived things that should have destroyed them and had somehow emerged stronger. 1 year after meeting Vivienne in that coffee shop, I quit my corporate job. Not impulsively, but strategically, with savings, a plan, and a clear vision. I'd been offered a book contract to write about women's transformation stories, and I was going to do it full-time. My family thought I was crazy. My friends worried about my financial security. But I kept thinking about Vivienne's question: what do you actually want, versus what do you think you should want? And what I actually wanted was to tell true stories. To document women's resilience. To create something that mattered more than corporate communications that would be forgotten as soon as they were sent. 2 years after meeting Vivienne, my book was published. It wasn't a massive bestseller, but it found its audience: women in transition who needed to know they could survive and thrive. Women who needed real stories, not sanitized inspiration. And Vivienne was right about something else too: the money followed the mission. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. The book led to speaking engagements. Speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities. Consulting led to a second book. Each step building on the last, each choice leading somewhere I couldn't have imagined 2 years earlier. I'm not a millionaire like Vivienne. I probably never will be. But I built something that's mine, something that matters to me, something that wouldn't exist if I hadn't been willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing who I was becoming. 3 years after that coffee shop conversation, I saw Vivienne again. She was speaking at a women's business conference in Chicago, and I was there covering it for a publication. After her talk, I approached her, nervous she might not remember me. But she did. Immediately. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Sarah, I've been following your work. The book was beautiful, exactly what I hoped you'd create." We had dinner that night, and I caught her up on everything that had changed. The job I'd quit, the book I'd published, the life I was building that looked nothing like the life I'd had 3 years earlier. "I knew you'd do it," Vivienne said. "I could see it that day in the coffee shop. You were ready. You just needed someone to tell you that being ready feels like terror, and terror isn't a reason not to begin." She paused, then pulled out her notebook, the same worn leather notebook from 3 years earlier. "Do you remember what you wrote? Your first promise to yourself." I recited it from memory: "I will stop living the life I think I should want and start building the life I actually want." Vivienne smiled. "Have you kept that promise?" I thought about my life, smaller financially than my corporate job would have provided, but infinitely richer in meaning and purpose. I thought about the work I was doing, the stories I was telling, the woman I was becoming. "Yes," I said. "I really have." Vivienne reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then my work is done. This is what I do now. I meet women at their crossroads and I tell them my story so they know what's possible. So they know that devastation isn't the end. So they know that heartbreak can become the foundation for something better than what was broken." She released my hand and leaned back. "But here's what I've learned from working with dozens of women: I can tell the story, but I can't do the work. Each woman has to decide for herself whether she's willing to sit in the discomfort of transformation. Whether she's willing to release who she was and become who she might be. Whether she's brave enough to choose the life she wants over the life she's expected to want." Vivienne looked at me intently. "You chose it, Sarah. You did the work. You sat in the discomfort. You built something new. And now you have a responsibility. What responsibility? I asked. To pass it forward, Vivienne said simply. To tell your story to other women who are stuck where you were stuck. To be for someone else what I was for you that day in the coffee shop. The person who tells the uncomfortable truth that transformation is possible but not easy, who shares the real story instead of the sanitized one, who gives permission to choose differently than expected. I felt the weight of that responsibility settling on my shoulders, but it wasn't heavy. It was purposeful. I will, I promised. And I have. Over the past few years, I've told Vivienne's story, with her permission, in articles, in speeches, in conversations with women who need to hear it. I've told my own story too, the messy middle of transformation that most people edit out. I've tried to be for other women what Vivienne was for me. Because here's what I learned from her story and from my own experience: heartbreak doesn't have to be the end of your story. Betrayal doesn't have to define you. Devastation can clear the ground for something better than what was destroyed, if you're willing to do the uncomfortable work of figuring out who you actually are beneath all the expectations and assumptions and social conditioning. Vivienne turned her heartbreak into a $24 million empire that served over 500,000 women. But the empire isn't the point. The point is that she refused to stay broken. She refused to accept that Marcus's betrayal was the defining moment of her life. She chose, deliberately and courageously, to use that devastation as fuel to become someone he could never touch. And in doing so, she gave permission to hundreds of thousands of women to do the same. To leave marriages that were destroying them. To protect themselves financially. To build businesses and careers and lives that were entirely theirs. To choose independence over partnership if that's what they actually wanted. To trust themselves to know what they needed better than anyone else did. That's what transformation looks like. Not a straight line from devastation to triumph. Not a fairy tale where everything works out perfectly. But a messy, uncomfortable, often lonely journey from being the person someone else broke to being the person you choose to become. And if you're reading this, if you're in your own moment of devastation or stuckness or uncertainty about who you're supposed to be, I want you to know what Vivienne taught me: you're going to survive this. More than survive it. You have the opportunity right now, in this moment of disruption, to become someone you never would have become if everything had stayed comfortable. It won't be easy. You'll have to sit in discomfort. You'll have to release expectations. You'll have to disappoint people who want you to stay who you were. You'll have to make choices that others won't understand. But on the other side of that discomfort is a life that's actually yours. A life you built deliberately rather than accepting by default. A life that reflects who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. That's what Vivienne gave me in a coffee shop 3 years ago: permission to become myself. And that's what I'm giving you now. The only question is, are you ready? What did this story mean to you? Subscribe to the Rich Old Lady Story, drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like for more inspiring stories every day.